Well, there's this idea that's become popular lately, and it shouldn't surprise us, really, considering where we are as a culture. But I hope you're all shocked by the laziness of this phrase. Are you ready? Here it is. It's their life. If what they're doing makes them happy and doesn't hurt anyone, they can live however they want. Really? Do we really think this is wise? It's their life. If what they're doing makes them happy and doesn't hurt anyone, they can live however they want. Okay, let's look at an example. This means that if a person has enough money, we'd be okay with them renting an apartment, getting a cable and internet subscription, and sitting around all day, watching TV and browsing the web. This person would have absolutely no reason to leave their apartment, since you can buy pretty much anything online nowadays. You can get your groceries delivered, you can buy new clothes, even exercise equipment, you name it. So really, they never have to set foot outside again. And we're supposed to be fine with that. Why? Well, it's their life. If what they're doing makes them happy and doesn't hurt anyone, they can live however they want. Now, the problem with this kind of thinking is that it doesn't really hold a person accountable. If we're free to live however we want, there's a chance that some of us will choose to live only for ourselves. And there's a good chunk of us who, if we're living only for ourselves, we're just going to lay around all day, because that's easy. So I hope you'll agree that this phrase kind of allows for poor life choices. And tonight I want to focus on one in particular, sloth. And no, not the cute, slow animals that you see on the internet, but sloth. I'm talking about extreme laziness or deep and uncaring apathy. Sloth means that a person would rather do nothing than something if you give them a choice. So let's take a look back at our phrase. We can say, it's their life. If being lazy makes them happy and doesn't hurt anybody, they can spend their days in sloth. We can say that, but God won't agree at all. Because when God thinks of sloth, he says our proverb for tonight. It says, lazy hands refuse labor, and the craving of a lazy person is fatal. So what God is telling us is that sloth is fatal. It's actually deadly. And that's why it's included in the list of the 7 deadly sins. Now, we've been kind of working through this list during the season of Lent. We've talked about pride and envy and gluttony. And we're going to take a look at greed and lust and wrath. But so far, I think we've come to see that these sins are deadly. And that all sin is deadly. And our sins are fatal. So, if our sins are fatal, they lead to death, and sloth isn't an exception. So let's say that work is the opposite of sloth. It makes sense, right? And if sloth is a sin, then good work is probably the opposite of sin. And that's why in the Bible, we see that God gives us work to do. And it's always to accomplish something good. For example, after God created Adam and Eve, he gave them some work to do. The Bible tells us that God blessed them. He said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. So, what's God's first work order to humanity? He says, make babies and take care of the world. Sounds like tough work. Later on, God gets a little more specific on how he'd like us to go about his good work. And Jesus sums it up like this. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So there it is. This is the essence of good work. Love God and love people. So why does sloth lead to death? Why is it fatal to not do the good work God has given to us? We don't believe good works earn God's favor. That's what makes us Lutherans. Yeah, we know we're sinners, but we also know that God forgives our sin, even our laziness. God promises to forgive my sloth by Jesus' death on the cross. And I believe in Jesus, so I know he's forgiven my sin. But still, there are these times where I want to say, it's my life. If being lazy makes me happy and it doesn't hurt anyone, I should be able to live as slothful as I want. Well, Jesus told a parable. He said there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger son asked his father for his inheritance, for the property that he'd received when his father died. And that's a big insult. I don't know if he caught that. But the son was basically saying his father was already dead to him. That he'd rather go live without his father's work and without his rules. And the heartbroken father allowed it. He divided his property. He gave a portion to his younger son. A few days later, the son packed everything he had and he moved away. And we're told that while he was gone, he squandered his wealth on dissolute living. So in other words, the guy enjoyed some sloth. His life was self-indulgent. It was decadent. He was lazy. He had a good time. But you all know the next part. The son ran out of money. Right around the time that this severe famine hit the country. And the son was so desperate, he had no money, no food, that he had to get a job feeding pigs. And after a few more days on an empty stomach, he started to think that pig's food looked pretty good. When he came to his senses, the son said to himself, all my father's hired hands have enough food to eat, and I'm over here dying of hunger. So with that, the son decided to return home. And he knew that he had to beg his father's forgiveness and that he was going to ask for work as one of the hired hands. But upon returning home, the son was greeted with something unexpected, because his father ran out to meet him. And before he could even speak, he was wrapped up in this tight hug. And it took a moment for the son to gather up his courage, but then he confessed, Father, I've sinned against heaven and you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. The father wasn't having it. He called to his servants and he had them bring out the finest clothing and jewels. Then he had them find the fatted calf, so that the household could have this big feast and celebrate the son's return. And the father did this out of loving forgiveness. In his own words, he said, my son was dead, but now he's alive again. What's lost has been found. My son was dead and is alive again. So this prodigal son had walked away from his dad. He wanted to live a life that was carefree. He was tired of all the rules. He was tired of the work. But he failed to see the blessings that were all around him. Sure, he could go spend his days in Sloth, but then he would be without his father. He could go spend his days in Sloth, but he'd be without love. He could spend his days in Sloth, but he'd find out that it wasn't really living. Instead, he came to know that the sin of sloth leads to death. Meanwhile, the older son had continued to do the good work of the father. Even upon his brother's return, he was out in the field, and the party began just as